This panel session will be moderated by Ambassador, as they're coming closer, Ambassador Jendai Fraser, and the panelists for this session will be Ambassador Andrew Young, Dr. Bernice King, John Hope Bryant, Honorable Louise Mushikiwabo, and Mr. Francis Gattari. Once again, this panel session will focus on the global struggle for dignity, equal rights, and equal opportunity. Thank you.
Cishijwe bugufi no kuba mu bwiza bwawe kuko urukundo nkunda mwami simbona uko narusobanura wamvanye ibuzimu nshira ibubu umpa inshuti n'abavandimwe unyobora inzira yo gukiranuka none ndidegembye wawe mwami urera ntiwishira ubwiza bwawe bumurika kurenza izuba mwami Yesu urera ntiwishira ubwiza bwawe bumurika kurenza izuba yego urabaruta bose yego urabiruta byose nukuri urabaruta bose impamo urabiruta byose nabowe n'urukundo rwawe mpagijwe n'ubuntu bwawe nejejwe no kuba mu gituza cyawe nabowe n'urukundo rwawe mpagijwe n'ubuntu bwawe nejejwe no kuba mu gituza cyawe nyir'ubutware mu isi no mu ijuru reka tuguhimbaze yego urabiruta byose nukuri urabaruta bose n'impamo urabiruta byose yego urabaruta bose yego urabiruta byose nukuri urabaruta bose n'impamo urabiruta byose yego urabaruta bose yego urabiruta byose nukuri urabaruta bose n'impamo urabiruta byose umva kandi kagarutse jireze none havudatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu rwanjye ndamubona nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatititititira nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatitira 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 wino bwiza budashirirora maboko y'uruyeye amwe akamisha inkakuruyenzi maze zikagubwa neza wowe waberewe ku muyange wari ibisabo wowe watoje umuco mwiza wa gakondo ngwino bwiza bwanjye ngwino gikundiro ngwino mu batangana bakwereka urukundo bakuguyaguye bagufate neza bakwigishe neza bakuguyaguye bagufate neza aho udatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu rwanjye ndamubona nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatitira 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 have udatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu rwanjye ndamubona nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatitira 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 iyo nkwitegereje umutima wanjye ugwa mu nka nkavuga nti mama bingibi ntakubisa uyu munsi n'uwawe ndakuka ngawishimye unezerwe n'inshuti n'abavandimwe ducinya akadiho tuvuna umugara dutembe giture ntakubisa ducinya akadiho tuvuna umugara dutembe giture ntakubisa have udatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu rwanjye ndamubona nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatitira 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 dore utaramiwe n'icyogere mu nkuba cyoya cyarukiza kuririmbira imitoma maze abanga kurotwa bisize ibirori eregura bikwiye muhorakeye eregura bikwiye cyuma cy'umusore tuvuge eye eye ayaya ayaya eye eye ayaya ayaya rwo mwiza baratira imihigo have udatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu gikundiro ndamuwe n'umutima w'urugo we numbe hafi maze twibonere dore utaramiwe have udatsikira yuko ubonye umukunzi wanjye niwe nagenewe nta wundi n'urubavu rwanjye ndamubona nkatitira 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 ndamubona nkatitira nkatitira nkatitira
Best production.
muri iyi si hari byinshi
Fellow Rwandans and friends of Rwanda, thank you for your patience. Once again, the panel session we're about to begin right now is entitled The Global Struggle for Dignity, Equal Rights, and Equal Opportunity. This session will be moderated by Ambassador Jendai Fraser. You may begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll stand up so that you can all see me. Good afternoon. Welcome. I know that the panelists here with me feel very privileged and honored to be among you on Rwanda Day. I was told that this is like a family union, and we're very much proud of being part of this, being welcomed into the Rwanda family. We have a truly distinguished panel this afternoon, and we have an extremely important subject to cover: the global struggle for dignity, equal rights, equal opportunity. So that you know where we're going, I always like to know where I'm going. Before I introduce the panelists, what we will do is the panel will consist of 40 minutes, 10 minutes each for each panelist, then 40 minutes for all of you, and then we'll come back to the panel for 10 minutes for their closing remarks. Again, this panel requires no introduction. They're all playing central roles in shaping our collective destiny and advancing the global struggle for dignity. First, it's an honor to introduce Ambassador Andrew Young, who requires no introduction.
Yay!
Ambassador Young has fought for global dignity on many battlefronts, from the pulpit as a pastor to the streets of St. Augustine, Selma, and Atlanta as a leader of the civil rights movement and a leader in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to pass the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, as the mayor of Atlanta, in the halls of Congress, as representing Georgia's 5th District, and indeed from that location fighting for liberation in Southern Africa and across Africa against colonization. Also on the halls of the global stage as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and indeed in the corporate boardrooms talking to the captains of industry to get them to invest in local communities in the United States as well as across Africa. To my immediate left is Professor Shaka, who is the CEO of the Rwanda Governance Board. He's also a professor of political science. He's my brother. We often say that we look alike. Ambassador Shaka has been a peacemaker across Africa, particularly in Central Africa. He's been working on promoting good governance, public service. He's a leading educator, and he's been involved in the integration of peace initiatives, again, in the Great Lakes region. Next to Ambassador Shaka, we have Dr. Bernice King.
Yay!
Dr. King, you all know, is an ordained minister. She's the CEO since 2012 of the King Center, and of course, the youngest child of our civil rights leader and icon, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King.
Yay!
Dr. King is a committed activist and advocate for freedom and justice through nonviolence. She earned her master's degree in divinity and has a Juris Doctor from Emory University. She's founded the Be a King Scholarship at Spelman College, her alma mater, in honor of her mother's legacy. She's a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, like her mother, and she's a powerful preacher bringing attention to human rights in the United States, including issues of gun violence, and being a strong voice about the shooting deaths of people like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and unfortunately so many others. Next to her, we have CEO Francis Gatari of the Rwanda Development Board. You all know Francis. You know Francis because he was a private secretary of President Kagame and so very much the go-to person in Rwanda. He has a distinguished background as an economist, trained in Toronto. He most recently got his master's from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, which I'm very proud of, having been a professor there. He's really played a central role in Rwanda's development over all of these many years, and I know that I've had a lot of personal interactions that when you are stuck, just go to Francis. And so we're really happy to see you return to the Rwanda Development Board. And then finally, we have Mr. John Hope Bryant, who's an entrepreneur. He leads the Bryant Group of companies, and he's also chairman and CEO of Operation Hope, the first nonprofit social investment banking organization, which was founded in 1992 after Rodney King riots in central LA. He's a global leader. He's a global leader in financial dignity. He has served on every president that I know of, advisory councils, from President Barack Obama's Advisory Council on Financial Capability, as well as serving on councils of President George W. Bush, Bill Clinton. Madam Minister, welcome. Welcome. How are you? Good. Good to see you, please. We've been honored to have the Minister of Foreign Affairs join us, Minister Louise Mushikiwabo, who I will introduce next. John Bryant, again, has served on the presidential councils of President Barack Obama, President George W. Bush, President Bill Clinton. He was a former UN Goodwill Ambassador to the US, and Operation Hope has recently built the Hope Financial Dignity Center at the historic Ebenezer Church here in Atlanta to honor Martin Luther King Sr., Daddy King. So Bryant, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Honored.
And then, as I said, we've been honored by Minister Louise Mushikiwabo, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, formerly the Minister of Information. She's also a public relations executive, having served at the African Development Bank and in the private sector. She's the author of Rwanda Means the Universe and numerous other articles. She holds language and interpretation degrees at the University of Delaware, and all of us across the continent are extremely grateful for her for being a clear voice about the dignity of Africans, both in Rwanda and across the continent. Minister, welcome. So as I said, we're going to ask the panel 2 questions. We'll start with one. I'll ask each one to take maybe 5 minutes to answer their question. And then we will start with the second question. And I'll start with our elder, Ambassador Young. But the same question will be, each panelist should take it. So Ambassador Young, based on your professional and personal experience, what do you see as a priority area of focus and engagement for dignity, for the global struggle, for dignity and liberation to be carried forward? And how do you define dignity and liberation, especially 50 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed?
Well, I would say that dignity is self-esteem, self-respect, respect for others. In fact, I think that in categorizing the years that I served in the US government, years where we didn't kill anybody and we didn't get anybody killed, the only thing that we did different was we respected everybody. President Carter asked me to go to Africa and ask African leaders what they expected of the United States. Nobody had ever asked African leaders what they thought. And he did the same thing going to the Middle East. And he did the same thing going to the Russians, and the same thing going down to Panama. And what we found was that people of the world only wanted you to respect their opinions. And that simply by asking them for their opinion, we were able to put together a foreign policy that didn't cost us very much and didn't kill anybody, and we transformed the landscape of Southern Africa, of Panama, Camp David, and even arms limitations with the Russians. And we let China and Vietnam, we welcomed them back into the United Nations. And when we had to condemn the Chinese for invading Vietnam and vice versa, the Chinese had the power to veto it. But I went to them and asked them, would they not veto it? And I think just showing them the respect of asking them not to veto it, they abstained and the resolution passed and we were able to make peace.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Minister, do you get the same respect today? And what do you believe is the priority areas for advancing global human dignity?
Thank you.
Yes.
Am I on?
Yes.
Thank you, Jendai. Being a woman, being an African, and being a foreign minister, I'm coming from different perspectives, but all linking to one thing. And that one thing is who we are, who we want to be, is really extremely important. What I have seen, especially in my professional work, is that when we approach different people, when we as Africans approach particularly the West, we are not allowed to be who we are. And that is manifested in so many ways. Sometimes it's very obvious. Many times it's not obvious. But we have a long way to go, I think, as a continent. But I think beyond the continent, as human beings, we would do so well in terms of bringing, you asked me about the global picture. If you look at the world today, many of the problems, much of the unrest around the world has to do with human beings looking for relevance, human beings wanting to be acknowledged. And so dignity is a very important part of it. It doesn't happen because we say it. It happens because it is deserved, first and foremost, but also we gain even more dignity by doing the right thing and respecting other people's dignity. So we can only, as human beings, get together, solve problems, advance ourselves as individuals, advance our countries, if we keep in mind that there is this intrinsic value that each human being has, which is their self-worth, which is that we matter, that we have views and we can make choices and we can make decisions for ourselves.
Thank you very much. Dr. King, in the United States, have we reached the point where, from civil rights we continue to have the struggle for human dignity. Where are we in that struggle, and how do you see advancing human rights and human dignity in the United States?
Well, let me start by sharing a quote that my mother stated, which I think is very critical for every generation to understand. She said, "The struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and you win it in every generation." I think this is an ongoing process. There is not necessarily a point at which we arrive and that's it. There are victories that we win along the way, but each generation has its own particular and peculiar win and victory that they have to forge forth and acquire. I believe, in addition to what Ambassador Young has said and my sister here, that dignity exists when people, no matter where they're from, have the freedom to participate in government. They have a voice in society. They have the freedom to prosper in life and the freedom to peacefully coexist. Just this past week, I was down in Ferguson, and we had an opportunity to meet with a lot of different groups. The King Center is getting ready to do a nonviolence training in that community. And one of the groups we met with happened to be gang members. Many of them have been a part of meetings, in fact, where they are planning to target 5 areas to burn up if there is not a verdict. And the amazing thing that we saw in our encounter with them is that when you allow people to have a voice, when you allow them to express themselves, whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent, it makes a difference in your ability to be able to connect with them. And when we allowed them the room to express everything that they expressed, then it gave us an opportunity to express some things and convince them to at least take some time and be willing to go through this process of the nonviolence training with us. And they bought into it. So back to what she said, people want, regardless of whether they're wrong or not, they want to feel valued, they want to feel respected, and they want you to acknowledge their worth. We didn't go in there in a judgmental way. We didn't go in there trying to convince them that they were wrong. We let them be who they were, and then we opened an opportunity for them to consider another way. Now, with that said, I think it was Albert Einstein that says, we cannot solve problems with the same level of thinking that they were created. Before my father left us, he wrote a book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? We haven't really answered that question yet, but we know that if we're going to continue as a civilization, we're going to have to choose community. But what he challenged us to do is to reorder our priorities and have a revolution of values. And one of the things he stated is something that I think is so critical moving forward, is that we have to find a way to ensure in everything that we do that people stay at the center of the care, the concern, and humanity stay at the center of whatever it is we do. So I would say going forward, we all have to change and shift our thinking. And it really has to begin at the level of leadership, because people follow leadership. And until the leaders of the nations of the world begin to understand this whole notion of dignity and respect and intrinsic value and worth of all human beings, I think we will be forever conflicted with one another. And so that would be my suggestion. And I'll close with this because I think it's so powerful. And typically I don't do this, but there's a movie, Planet of the Apes, that was out recently, the second one. Very powerful movie. I suggest you get it on DVD if it's still out to see it. And something in there that was said by Caesar, the lead ape in the movie. He said, apes don't kill apes. And it pierced me because it was a battle going on between apes and humans. And when he said apes don't kill apes, I thought about how we treat each other as humans, and yet we are the highest form of God's creation with the capacity to have higher level thinking, to draw upon our spiritual self, and yet we have allowed ourselves to come down to the level almost of animals. And apes, respecting other apes, it didn't matter what they look like, form, fashion, whatever. And so the reality is we as a humanity have to understand the fundamental principle of humans respecting and valuing and not destroying the humanity of other humans.
Thank you. Francis, you're the youngest person on this panel. How do you see the issue of global struggle for dignity and liberation 20 years after Rwanda's liberation?
Thank you very much, Jendai. The way I see personal dignity and global dignity, they are interlinked. But the pursuit for dignity, or agaciro as we call it in Rwanda, is incredibly personal. It starts with my personal desire for what I want for me, for my family, for my community, and how I want to define myself and to exercise the choice in getting that. So it starts from personal, but you can never have it completely until it's collectively achieved. And that's why the pursuit for personal agaciro takes on a level for liberation, personal liberation, but also communal liberation. It takes on also different shapes because when you get political liberation, as we have in Rwanda, you haven't necessarily acquired all elements of liberation. We still have to conquer issues of poverty. We still have to conquer issues of disease. We still have to conquer issues of many other elements that make a society, but also at an individual level, not fully accomplished. And that makes liberation a continuous process. But it also makes it a continuous process over generations. 50 years ago, the civil rights movement in the US is still relevant today. In fact, I would like to quote one statement from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1963 when he was leading a march in Birmingham, Alabama, in the famous letter from the jail, when he was being castigated by the clergy in Birmingham, Alabama, in the so-called call for unity. I'll quote one statement that makes it very relevant today. He says that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us. And it is still the same. So liberation can never be achieved at an individual level. It has got to be achieved collectively. In fact, I also want to quote, it's very important symbolically being here next to a giant of the civil rights movement and in the presence of Dr. King's own daughter, that I pay tribute to some of the statements that he made. One of the other statements that Dr. King made in that famous letter was that the question is not whether we will be extremists, but rather what kind of extremist. An extremist for love or an extremist for hate. And so the liberation cannot be, or the pursuit for personal dignity can never be neutral. You have to take a position, because the pursuit for Agachiro is about a principle and choosing to go for it or not to go for it. And it's very, very relevant today as we talk about it in Atlanta next to Ambassador Yang and in the presence of Dr. King's legacy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bryant, what do you see as the priority area of focus and engagement? You've coined the term from civil rights to silver rights. Tell us about that, and 20 years after Rwanda's liberation and 50 years after civil rights.
First of all, good afternoon. I'm sorry, I'm from the black church. I'm used to seek and respond. I'll try that one more time. Good afternoon. I think before I answer that, let me just say, you heard from Dr. Bernice King, and I'm going to challenge the women here from Rwanda to invite Dr. King to Rwanda. Because the same dignity I see in amazing, brilliant, pride-filled African women from Rwanda, I see in Dr. King, who of course is African. We're all African, and I would encourage you to invite her, because if you invite her, she may not come home. To answer your question, Ambassador, and first of all, Ambassador, you are, of course, you're an ambassador, so you're always right, but let me just correct you and say, I'm the youngest person on this panel, not him. I got him by 4 months.
Okay.
When I think about dignity, I think about South Africa and Ubuntu. I am me because you are you. And how that translated into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission under Nelson Mandela. I think about Agachiro and dignity in Rwanda, and how that translated into the Gacaca courts in Rwanda after genocide. I think about being in Rwanda with Ambassador Young 10 years ago and traveling from one end of the country to the other and talking to women who are weaving baskets as a form of rebuilding community and rebuilding their lives and making an income too. Many times bonded by their pain of having lost loved ones, many times the families of supposedly the different views or the different sides of who did what to whom, but they found a way to work together for good. Or people who walked over supposed shrubs, which were coffee bean bushes, that they then turned into gold and literally sold, I think it was blue bourbon coffee to Starbucks, and turned this thing into a crop, and this crop into an income, and this income into prosperity for a nation. And as I think about, my friend Yamina reminded me that Operation Hope was founded almost at the same time as the rebirth of Rwanda after the genocide in '94 for you. For us, it was 1992, the Rodney King riots. And while we've helped a lot of people and we're making some progress, and I've just authored this book, which is available today, How the Poor Can Save Capitalism, which to me is dignity walking, having the poor involved in this campaign to save capitalism and build our world. In my opinion, Rwanda is the role model for what I'm talking about. And what I mean by that is you have the most progressive constitution, not in Africa, but the world. I believe 30% of all women by constitutional mandate have to be members of your assembly in Rwanda, but now it's more than 64% of all members of the assembly in Rwanda are women. That's dignity walking. You go through Kigali, the safest place I've ever been, not just in Africa, but the world. It's a safe city. That's dignity walking. You ask this question of what does dignity mean, and we have this organization called Global Dignity that the Crown Prince of Norway, Haakon, and I put together through the World Economic Forum about 14 years ago. And we have 68 countries in the world that are members, and Rwanda is the 68th. But really, Rwanda was the first because I was inspired to do Global Dignity by Rwanda in my trip with Ambassador Young. So here's my answer. The sentiments are great. The theory is great. The philosophy is great. The way you've treated those who have even persecuted you is great. Ambassador Young taught me, talk without being offensive, listen without being defensive, but always leave even your adversary with their dignity. Because if you don't, they'll spend the rest of their life trying to make you miserable. He taught me that. But nothing stops a bullet like a job.
Well,
and the misnomer in the Middle East is that the Arab Spring was started through Islamic extremism. That's incorrect. It was started by a little cart vendor named Muhammad in Tunisia. He just wanted to take care of his family. He wanted to pay his bills. He wanted to send his child to school. Of course, we're lucky in America. We get education supposedly for free, but you got to pay for education in most parts of the world. And he was trying to pay for his education. He was trying to put a roof over his family's head. That's dignity, financial dignity. And a policeman came by, and I'm not going to call him law enforcement. A policeman came by and said, "You don't have a permit. Give me that cart." He went to the police department and said, "Sir, I'm so sorry if I offended you. How much is the permit?" There is no permit. Translation, I make the rules for your life. He begged, he pleaded, but realizing there was no way out and no way for him to take care of his family, he went out in the middle of the street and set himself on fire. And within 30 days, the whole Tunisian government fell. And within 3 months, the ripple effect all through the Middle East. So we think that it's about Islamic extremism. That's incorrect. It was about a gentleman who was not allowed to have a job, not allowed to take care of his family, not allowed to have dignity in his own life. And so I think today, freedom is self-determination. The ability to do what you want, when you want, how you want, whenever you want, whenever you want, and to maximize your gifts. Rwanda is trying to do just that. So when you judge Rwanda, you got people running around saying all kind of crazy stuff about the president, and I'm offended by that because I think he's a great man. And nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect.
he's pretty close.
Nobody's perfect. There is no perfect. People come to America, "Oh, I hate America." I say, fine. You hate America? Go to the place that's perfect. I'll wait. So Kagame's a good man. And I know he's a good man, not because the emotionalism that people are, again, Yamina taught me, it's not the emotional thing that people want to put emotionalism on Africa. We treat other nations with the respect of certainty and facts, but we treat Rwanda and Africa with emotions. But the facts of Rwanda show the economy doing like this. The facts of Rwanda show jobs doing like this. The facts of Rwanda show women doing like this. The facts of Rwanda show human dignity doing like this. The facts of Rwanda show a decent, loving, God-fearing, peaceful city and country. I say let the facts speak for themselves.
We can go home now. You said it.
Thank you.
We can call on the president now.
Amen. Well, Ambassador Young, you took us from countries listening to each other, and we've heard from all of the panelists the importance of communication, the importance of recognition, the connectedness of all of us as human beings. What about the relationship between Americans and Rwanda specifically and our histories? Are there parallels and similarities and lessons that we can learn from each other about upholding the values of Agasiro and the values of equality and opportunity from the civil rights movement?
Well, I think that one thing that we both learned is that you cannot overcome hatred with hatred. You can only overcome hatred with love. You can't overcome fear with more violence. Fear must be replaced by understanding. And I don't think there's anybody, I've been to 152 countries in the world, and I don't know a single place, including South Africa and the United States, that has done as much to reconcile the differences of people without violence and create one people. And I think John is absolutely right. All you have to do is look not only at the numbers, but look at the people. I went to Rwanda 10 years ago because I missed out on what was happening in the 90s. And I forgot why, but my first wife of 40 years was dying of cancer from 1991 to 1994. And I was kind of out of it. And so I didn't know what had happened until I wanted someone in my office who could speak French. And Yamina Karitani came, and she spoke French. And that's all I knew. And then I learned more and more about the Rwandan people, not because she said anything, but simply because of the way she did things. She got to work on time. She was efficient. She took care of what had to be done. She was assertive and yet humble. And I said, "Is everybody in Rwanda like you?" "Oh, Mr. Ambassador, you embarrass me. I'm nothing." I said, "No." And I went to visit. And I fell in love. And I think that Rwanda is the kind of place that I could live. And I wouldn't have to be important. I wouldn't have to be rich. I could live. I admired the fact that the government officials one day a month went out and picked up the trash and painted up and cleaned up. And everybody, the priests and the parishioners, the children and the old folks, everybody did a little something to make their community a little better. And I don't know, I think you all have so much to be proud of. And I think we can learn a lot from you. We had 200 years of slavery and another 100 years of legal segregation. And we're still struggling with it. Now we're suffering from economic segregation. What happened in St. Louis was not so much about race, but it was economics and the lack of political participation. And if you're economically secure and stable and participate economically and politically, you resolve problems without violence and without bloodshed. And I think the fact that Rwanda has done so much, I would still say that Rwanda probably has done more for, women have done more for Rwanda and Rwanda for women than maybe any place in the world.
Thank you, sir. Madam Minister, you've lived in the United States for more than 20 years. Are there lessons that Rwanda has for the United States and that the United States has for Rwanda in terms of equality, opportunity, human dignity? Akasiro? Cyril.
I got you.
I got you.
I feel uncomfortable, and I think it would be pretentious.
Oh, I knew it. This is a minister here.
To say that Rwanda has lessons. We've learned a few things in the last 20 years, and we have had the opportunity to look back at our history, what went wrong, who we are today, where we are going, how we can get there. But every country is different, and Rwanda today is the sum total of its experience, good and bad. So there are some things that fit in Rwanda that would not make a lot of sense in the United States. There are things that we look at from the Rwandan perspective in the United States, and these things don't make sense to us because of our culture, because of our geographical location, because of our value system. But one of the things that I find most amazing, and I'm really very happy about, is that this Rwanda Day this year in Atlanta gives us the opportunity as Rwandans and our friends in the United States and elsewhere to get to know, to get to understand, and to connect with a large community of African Americans. We don't know African Americans in Rwanda. And I went to school in this country, and I was coming from Rwanda directly to the United States. And when I arrived at my school back in the mid-'80s, everybody would ask me, I was at the University of Delaware in a small town called Newark, and everybody would ask me how did you end up in this small place? And I would say, do you know how big Rwanda is? And so what I would like to say, which I think everybody in this room should think about, is we really need to get to know one another. We don't know each other. We cannot influence each other. We cannot work together for some of the common global goals and values without knowing who we are, without understanding what the expectations are from both sides. So yes, there are certain things we can export to the United States besides coffee. And the first thing is, I am Rwandan, this is where I come from, and I want you to know me and to understand me. It's really very, very important. And vice versa. When Americans come to Rwanda, we would want to understand them. We would want not just to be politically correct or not offensive, but really to get to know who they are. And so it's wonderful that we are in Atlanta because of what we know and what we think of Atlanta. We have had the opportunity to know Ambassador Young and interact with him, and he's a fantastic man. But can we get what we want partially out of this Rwanda Day in Atlanta, which is to connect, that is to know, to respect, to understand the expectations of African Americans, so that being in Rwanda, we know who we are dealing with, we know what we can do together, and we know how to advance each other's interests. So I really hope one of the takeaways from this gathering is connection, better understanding, and more respect for one another. We Rwandans and the people of Atlanta, particularly the African American community.
Thank you, Minister. We accept that offer. And I hope Dr. King will accept the one extended to her as well, yes, to go to Rwanda. Dr. King, what lessons do you see America being able to impart to Rwanda and to the broader African continent? And what lessons do you think we can gain from Rwanda?
Well, I don't know if I can adequately address that question. I've never been to Rwanda, obviously, and I'm learning a lot today as I sit here. And in light of that, I would probably say that there is a lot that we can learn from Rwanda. I think America has a lot to teach, but a lot of times we fail to realize that we have a lot that we need to learn. And especially from countries that we may not feel is on par with who we are. And so when I was talking with you earlier, I was sharing the fact, number one, that I am just overwhelmingly pleased with the progression that you all have made with regard to women, and especially in Parliament. And that story of how that happened needs to be shared for inspirational purposes. So I think the most important thing is there is a large community in America, the greater percentage perhaps of those of us in the African American community that unfortunately know very little about the continent from whence we come. We have a lot of myths that we have to overcome. And we know very little about the countries that have been successful coming through conflict and being successful economically from a political standpoint. And we have to figure out, how do we get those stories out? How do we share those stories widespread so that we can begin to draw strength from one another and support each other? Because I think that's really what it's about. So that would be my suggestion and contribution, that the Rwanda story, not where you are today, but how did you get there? Because that fascinates me, because I would love to see America move in that direction, especially as it relates to issues of gender equity.
Thank you. Mr. Gattari, not the youngest. You are at the nexus as the CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. You are the interface between America and Rwanda. How do you see the lessons, and how do you translate that into the type of connection that's been discussed as necessary for us to go forward collectively?
Thank you, Ambassador. This country, the United States, has achieved an amazing level of transformation. It continues to be a pace setter in technology and innovation, in education, and continues to have an enormous amount of investment resources. The potential for this country to change the fate of many countries around the world is real. In our pursuit for economic transformation of Rwanda, and in our mandate as the Rwanda Development Board, we see the United States as an important ally in this journey. And so we miss no opportunity in letting the Americans know about the potential for partnering with our business community. We miss no opportunity in showing the areas available for cooperation. And there's a lot of learning to be taken from this country because of the journey for economic transformation, but also in many other ways. And so particularly for the young people, Rwandan young people who have chosen to live in the United States, you should not lose this opportunity to educate yourself, to learn and understand this country and the potential that it offers, but most importantly, the people of this country, because of that particular potential. But I also want to take it to another level, that there are other lessons that we can learn from here, that while the United States has achieved this level of economic growth, transformation, and development, yet they also still find there are other things they still have to keep working on. That's why the discussions about self and communal liberation continues to be relevant today. And so as a country, as Rwandans, and in our pursuit for Agaciro, we cannot be complacent, because this journey for giving yourself the dignity at an individual level, at a community level, has got to continue. It is still relevant in the United States. It is relevant in our country, and more so in the future. But also brings out this whole issue of collectivity in the pursuit of Agaciro. What happens in this country matters very much to us, as much as what happens in Rwanda. Let me add that Rwandans have achieved a very satisfactory level of self-improvement and achieved Agaciro as we continue to pursue that. But we must continue to learn from our history, because as the generation of those who have participated in the liberation of our country get older, we must not miss the story of our liberation. We must not become complacent as guardians of that liberation and taking the torch forward. But even at the individual level, whenever we achieve that, it's important to be compassionate, because as individuals, you don't achieve the same level of development or understanding about Agaciro at the same level. You must understand the responsibility for holding each other's arm and be able to help each other, because the liberation of the other individual, the other person in our community, is your responsibility as much as it's the other person's responsibility. So compassion has got to be part and parcel of Agaciro, of personal dignity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryant, we come to you. What are the lessons? And you're a man of vision and a man of practical action. What do we need to do to forge those values and forge the practical relationships that will advance our countries and our communities?
So I'm not as gracious as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and she was very humble in her comments. I have a very specific suggestion of Rwanda to the U.S. and U.S. to Rwanda. But before I get to that, let me just say something that maybe nobody will say, but I think needs to be said. I've been going back and forth, wasting my time on Twitter with folks who don't share in the glory of this wonderful gathering. Let me say something to you, and you can agree or not agree. We should not let the perfect be the death of the good. And when you can do good, you go and do good, and you try to get to perfect. The LinkedIn founder said, if you're not slightly embarrassed by your 1.0 software release, you release too late. You need to get into the marketplace of ideas. Abraham Lincoln, arguably one of the best presidents we ever had, if not the best, murdered April 16, 1865. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we praise here today, her father, murdered April 4th, 1968. Gandhi, who we praise today, world over, who we give credit to for having a united India, who tried to bring two countries together that's now separate, murdered. Malcolm X, who dared to come back from Mecca and say that all white people weren't the devil, dead within 2 weeks. I can go on and on and on. Threats against Mandela, not by the white Afrikaners, by his own party, threatening him and saying that he was a traitor for negotiating with the enemy. We now know that was a brilliant vision. Leadership's not easy. Leadership's not a popularity contest. I'd rather you respect me and learn to like me than like me and never respect me. My last comment, I'll get to your question. When I founded Operation Hope, people ignored me, Ambassador. I was 26 years old. I chased him for 10 years. They dismissed me. First, people will ignore you, then they will criticize you, then they will copy you, and then you win. So today, I have this book out. We've helped 2 million people. We've directed $2 billion in private capital to underserved neighborhoods. And this book is out now. It's now the only best-selling book in the world on economics by an African-American author. But I was told none of this was possible. I was told it was a dream. I was told I was a dreamer. But yet still we rise. So step over mess and not in it. And do the right thing even though you don't get credit for it. And understand that history will treat you well. And so here's my suggestion. I believe that Rwanda, with all the peacefulness that I have observed, and my friend Yamina, who lost 92 members of her family, and is a very embodiment of love and grace and joy, and your U.S. ambassador, or the ambassador to the U.S. who brought me here, who got me here, all these people embody this richness. We need, and Bernice King and I were talking about, we need that in America. We need that spirit of peacefulness in America. So we need you to import what I call real dignity as a value system into America. Don't be humble about that. Be bold about that. And then we need to export the thing that has made America unique in the world, which is entrepreneurship, small business creation. The miracle that nobody understands is that all job growth in America comes from small businesses, entrepreneurs, startups, and shoot-ups in year 3 through year 7. Half of American jobs, 100 employees or less. 70% of American jobs, 500 employees or less. We obsess about these big companies, but there's only 974 companies in America that employ 10,000 people or more, less than 1,000, and they're not hiring. So the magic of America are these small little enterprises. Every big business was once a small one. We want to inspire Rwanda to double its efforts around economic empowerment, to redouble its efforts around job creation, to go to the grassroots and find these young people with ideas and passion and energy, but maybe no capital, maybe no advice, and connect them with role models, connect them with a little capital, create a little venture capital fund, and inspire them to become the job creators that'll create peace, not just in Rwanda. What does Africa need? And I'm done. Africa doesn't need necessarily more aid. It needs a generation of taxpayers.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. Just as before we turn it over to the audience, it's your turn. Let me just do a little advertising break here. Carnegie Mellon University is now based in Rwanda, so you can go to school in Rwanda and Carnegie Mellon and get a degree. And I think they have a booth someplace here. So let's turn it over to the audience. Do we have some taxpayers out there? Do we have some visionaries? It's your turn. I don't see a hand. Right here.
Stand up.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm very impressed listening to all the personalities, but I want to bring to you a very simple experience, what I mean by agaciro. And please allow me to give you a personal experience. My name is John, and I was 14 when my father died in the 60s because of genocide. So before he dies, he delivered a message to our elder sister who were with him. And he said, please tell to the boys, we were two in school, tell to the boys, the message was in Kinyarwanda, of course, but I can't, in my very poor English, translate it. So I would ask our foreign ministers, Louise, please, the message was like this. Aho muzaja hose, icyo muzaba muri cyose, muzaba abagabo, kuko mu Rwanda nta mbwa yurira urugi. Please. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Am I on?
The minister will translate for the rest of us.
I don't think I'm on. Am I on?
They'll turn you on.
Okay. First of all, I will translate for a small fee. I think I'll try to get as close to the exact meaning of the words of the dying father to his two sons and daughter. Wherever you go, however far you go, do not I'm trying to be gender sensitive because literally what he said was behave as men, be men, which really meant be successful, be steady, achieve certain things in your life, because in Rwanda, so he was saying be men as opposed to being literally dogs, because where you come from in Rwanda, dogs can only go so high. They can't climb too high. I hope I've...
I think we understand. Human dignity, human dignity. Have your human dignity. Ambassador.
In response to what you're saying, I say that Martin Luther King told us that to be a man, you have to overcome the love of money and the fear of death. And then just I think it was just yesterday, I met a man who said that his brother was killed when he was 7 years old. And his brother, who was older, had been wrongly identified as a murderer and had been convicted of murder, and he was nowhere near the murder. But he was a black man, and they identified him based on he had the same body shape of the killer. And he was sentenced to death. And he called his family and his brother, who was then a little boy, and he said, "I'm asking them to put me to death. But I want you to know that I'm not guilty. I was nowhere near, I did not do this, but I cannot help you in prison. But if I die in the electric chair, it will release my spirit. And I promise you, I will look out for you." He said this to this boy who was 7 from a very, very poor family. Yesterday, I had lunch with him, and he's the vice president in charge of diversity and development for one of the top 100 corporations in America. And he says, "I know I didn't earn this." He said, "But the spirit of my brother has watched over me." I say to the people of Rwanda, the spirits of our ancestors and those who have gone on are watching over us. And we are not so much better than the others around us. But the spirit of innocence in which our ancestors gave their lives means that if we are sensitive to the Spirit, we will not overcome, but we will prevail, because, as her father used to say, truth crushed to earth will always rise again.
Thank you, Ambassador Young. I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and then I'm going to give the panelists a chance to have a closing remark. So one more question. Over here, there's hands pointing. Yes, right here.
I don't really have a question. What I do have is experience that in my whole entire life I could have never achieved unless I would have visited Rwanda. This year I visited Rwanda for the first time, and I was in utter shock to find a country where people are united, people who are respectful, people who love the land they live on. Every third Saturday, these people go out and care for the land that they live on. You were talking about what America could learn from you. Well, America, people like me, could learn from you the unity and the power you can have by getting together through creation and care. We as Americans do not really care about our land. We do not really make efforts. We expect for someone else to do it for us. It's impossible, unless at the very basic level, from a very small age to whatever you are capable of creating. unless you go out there as Americans and care for your land and care for the place that you live on and care for each other, you could never, ever achieve what Rwanda has. And it is the most unbelievable experience because traveling through the world, I had never met a country or a people like this. And I'm very thankful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Since you didn't take a question, and I may have a little leeway, is there one question, a different question? I appreciate the comment. Back here, all the way back. Brief question. All right. Uh-oh, we got a problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Brief, and then our sister, and then that's the last question.
Thank you. I guess y'all are representatives of the American government in whatever capacity. And as a citizen, a person on the ground, I believe we get different approaches. On one hand, the American government says things on TV, on the radio, that are against what Rwanda might be doing. I could be more specific. Basically what I'm asking, how do you, the panel, reconcile what you do as representatives of the American government and some of the things that the government does towards us as Africans or towards Black Americans?
Yeah, you moved the mic away from your mouth a little bit. Just.
I think he said.
I guess I don't know if I move the mic away from my mouth, you might not hear me though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, how do you reconcile what you do in your professional capacity and the fact on the ground sometimes? You know, tomorrow we might wake up and we're told, "Oh, you're not very democratic," and that's coming from an American administration. So I don't know. For me, sometimes there's a difference between what I hear right now and what comes out of Washington.
Understood. And now the question of the lady.
Yeah.
I'll translate it for you.
The ambassador, thank you for this opportunity. Banyarwanda muraho. Agaciro, this is very important because we're so excited for all these Rwandese to be. For me, it's not even a question. It's Agaciro which we have. Before, it was like impossible to come to United States, like this big number. But because of the dignity we have, we've given a dignity to Rwandese to feel proud of our country, whereby we come to United States and get that exposure, everything they're doing. And I'm very proud, like when we go back, we do the same thing. And that's a dignity we have given to, you've given it to us because of the opportunities we get from different countries. It's no longer like going to heaven to come to these countries. It's because we've given it to ourselves. It's really, really important, and I feel so proud of Rwandese. That's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the question was the gap between how we're often portrayed, whether in the media or by other governments. The US government saying Rwanda is not democratic. The media saying African Americans are criminally prone or something. How the gap between what you know about yourself in your country versus in your community versus what others say about you, and how do you manage that on a daily basis? And what I would ask you is, in answering that question, also answer that question as part of your closing statement, if you would. And we're going to start this time from the youngest to the eldest.
Or the most rebellious to the wisest. No. First of all, it's a great question. I love edgy questions. I'd say that Reverend Murray told me it's not what people call you, it's what you answer to that's important. And never answer out of your name. So to become reasonably comfortable in your own skin is so critically important in anything you do in your life. There is a difference between being broke and being poor. Being broke is economic, but being poor is a disabling frame of mind any depressed condition of your spirit, and you must vow never to be poor again. So that makes it less important, the inconsistent messages that you may get from the outside about who you are, and allows you to remain constant through the struggle. I say that to say this. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln created a freedmen's bank to teach free slaves about money. But that bank failed, and 70,000 black depositors lost all their money. These are former slaves, but still we believed in America. 100 years later, her father rose up with the civil rights movement. But he was called Martin Luther King and Martin Luther Coon and Uncle Tom and sellout, supposedly by his friends. And yet he still rose up and did the right thing, even though his own government, some of it, was saying no blacks allowed, even though some of it was saying you don't have the same rights, even though some of it was saying you can't go where somebody else goes. He didn't give up on America, and he didn't give up on himself. And because of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. not giving up, we've got a Barack Obama in the White House.
On that note, and I think in this time, the youngest speaks for all of us. I'm told we do have to close the panel. And I think you've spoken very well. I think this has been a very distinguished panel, so please, all of you, join me in thanking all of them. Well done. Well done.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists for this very enlightening discussion on global struggle for dignity, equal rights, and equal opportunity. As our panelists are exiting the stage, I would like to invite you all to stay around as we enter the next part of our program, which is entitled Have Your Say Community Meeting. So this will be a 30-minute session where everybody attending here will be able to ask questions, interact with the following ministers. We'll have Minister Gatete, Minister Tugireyezu, Minister Mushikiwabo, Minister Musoni, and Professor Shaka. So once again, the following session that's about to begin is a 30-minute question and answer interaction with different ministers from Rwanda. Again, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.